that was called the Grim Reaper campaign.
I remember that ad.
It was made a huge impact on society at that time, and public awareness has grown since then, and so has the number of people contracting the virus in Australia and worldwide. Today, HIV awareness advocates and medical researchers met in Canberra to acknowledge 3 decades of the virus and what needs to be done to reduce the number of people contracting it.
Well, it comes ahead of the 20th International AIDS Conference, which will be held in Melbourne next month, and it's just been announced that the former President of the United States, Bill Clinton, will be in attendance. Well, Brent Allan is one of the organisers of the event, and he's lived with the HIV virus for the past 15 years. He now heads the Living Positive Victoria organisation, which works on the community response to AIDS. And Brent joins us now from Canberra. Brent, thanks very much for your time this evening.
My pleasure.
30 years. Chart for us in broad terms not only the medical advances that have been made, but also the changes in social attitudes to HIV/AIDS.
I think what, really demonstrated what HIV was about at the very beginning of the epidemic was fear, uncertainty, and a sense of almost doom. This was replaced with the advent of antiretroviral therapies in the late 1990s with more of a sense of hope. And today, I think many of us living with HIV, certainly in the developing world, are experiencing a quality of life that we would have never thought possible.
Brent, talk us through your experience, when you first found out you had HIV/AIDS. I understand that it wasn't particularly an easy thing to grasp, the community response necessarily. How did you get through that time?
I think all of us get through that time with the love and support of our family, our friends, and our community. For me, it was about getting involved and being involved in the response to HIV. For me, that felt like the responsible thing to do. Almost like being called to war.
Now, Brent, given that it has been 30 years that this sum of awareness, of knowledge has grown through the community, in spite of that, data last year showed the rate of newly diagnosed HIV cases in Australia had risen by 10% in just the previous 12 months. Now, that was the largest increase in about 2 decades. Why would that happen?
I think that there are lots of reasons why that's happening. Part of it is a product of the fact that people are testing more often because of new testing technologies. But I think also it's about the fact that people are still trying to navigate themselves through the complex world of sexual fulfillment and a sexual life and having to take risks.
When you talk navigate through that world, Brent, what advice, what kind of campaigns could be put out there in order to mitigate those risks?
Well, I think that there's always going to be a place for safer sex campaigns. Using condoms, we know, is the easiest way to prevent HIV infection. But there are new technologies on the market, and these are the things that we'll be exploring at the AIDS 2014 conference. There are pre-exposure prophylaxis medications, post-exposure medications, and including an array of new condom devices that people can choose the ones that suit them best.
Brent, is there any place, do you believe, if there has been a change of attitude, at the same time a growth in knowledge, is there any place for a shock tactic, a shock ad like that which we just played an excerpt from 1987? Does that hold any value?
I think, what happened in 1987, as I said, we were consumed with our fear. And I think that ad exemplified that. In today's day and age with the discerning consumer, I don't think that ad would play value. I think what we need to address is the sophistication that people want. It's not a one-stop shop. It's not one size fits all. There are increasingly different ways that we can reduce our risks in our lives. And that's what people want to hear, which is the truth.
Brent, given that there's so many more antiretroviral drugs available, the drug market is huge, and there's a sense really that HIV/AIDS can be not so much fixed, but at least be mitigated. Is there a trend, in a sense, amongst younger men particularly that, well, there's a drug that can help me out, I don't need to be so safe around sex?
I think that is something that a myth that people buy into. The drugs will just cure it. But these drugs have side effects, and the compliance rate of these drugs is extraordinarily high. You know, you have to ensure that you have 95% compliance in order for these drugs to work. That's very high. You can't miss doses. And plus, added on top of that is the thing that you addressed earlier on, the sense of stigma that still lingers regardless of the drug's effects.
Brent, we've been talking, of course, about our society, our community. Give us a broad picture in regard to how developing countries are coping with and containing HIV/AIDS.
Well, I think, you know, globally what we're talking about is an epidemic that is still out of control. 36 million people living with HIV, the equivalent to the size of Brisbane. In terms of population, is diagnosed every year. 5 people every minute. And the number of people who die every year from HIV worldwide is the size of Perth. These are not insignificant numbers.
Brent, what do you expect to come out of the conference in a few weeks' time, that 20 years since that first AIDS conference? What would you like to see come out of that conference? You've got some high-profile figures there.
I think that there are a number of things personally I want to hear. I want to hear about the developments in the cure. We know that there are significant scientific advancements in cure, and I'm excited to hear what those are. I think I also want to understand a little bit more about how people living with HIV are playing the increased role in changing people's lives. It was only 20 years ago or less that, people living with HIV couldn't participate in prevention because we were dying. And now we're living full lives. And I think our role as positive people is to be the catalyst of change.
Brent Allan, the Executive Director of Living Positive Victoria, we so appreciate your time tonight. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.